Joining us right now is Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and author of Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. Alan Dershowitz is with us. Alan, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So what do you think? Is this going to face the same kind of challenge? Are these revisions enough to quiet the opposition?
Well, these are the revisions that I had proposed on your show and other shows immediately after the ban was held up by the federal court. So they've done their homework. They've gotten lawyers involved. They've improved it. They've taken religion out of it. There's no express reference to religion. The president did a smart thing. He distanced himself from it by not actually participating in the rollout, and it makes it harder to say this is his Muslim ban based on what he said during the campaign or what Rudy Giuliani said thereafter. So Chairman Perez is just dead wrong when he says it's just as unconstitutional as the last one. This is much, much more likely to survive constitutional attack. It may be no better from a point of view of policy, but from a point of view of constitutionality, they have dotted their I's, they've crossed their T's, they will probably prevail in court proceedings. But there will be challenges. I guarantee you that the attorneys general of Washington and Minnesota and New York are up and burning the midnight candles trying to figure out how to challenge this in court.
Well, so they took Iraq out. What besides that makes this more constitutional than the first go-around? What were the most important changes to this?
They took religion out. They didn't have a special exception for minority religions, which was perceived as discriminating in favor of Christians. And they've made it clear that administrators can give case-by-case preference, but it would have to be based not on somebody being a Christian, but on being a minority religious person. You can be a Sunni in a Shia country, a Shia in a Sunni country. You can be a Baha'i. So there's no explicit reference to religion, and that makes the case for it being an establishment of religion much weaker. Also, he followed the advice of me and others by kind of rescinding the questionable first order and saying we're not going to challenge this in the courts. At least that's what it looks like. We're going to let this one, the second one, be challenged. This one has been vetted by the Justice Department, the State Department, National Security. It'll be much harder to challenge. Look, it can still be challenged. You can still argue that there is no empirical relationship between the countries picked and the kinds of terrorism we've had in this country. But if the court applies simply a rational connection test, it will survive. If it looks at it with a kind of super scrutiny based on religious discrimination, there will be some problems. But it's a much stronger order from the point of view of constitutional litigation. So I think it was a smart thing to do.
Alan, it's Dagan McDowell. Does President Trump need this order to reduce the number of refugees coming into this country? His goal, 50,000, no. Which is cutting President Obama's number by more than half. Already about 35,000 have come into the United States, so we're getting close to that ceiling. He could do that separately than this order, couldn't he?
Yes, and he'd be smart to do that. Remember, the courts give tremendous deference to administration of the law. That's the president's job. It's the executive. But when the president issues an order, which sounds like it's legislative in nature, the courts scrutinize that to a greater extent. So practically everything that he seeks to achieve, he could achieve just by telling the agencies, tighten up, cut down the numbers, look more harshly at these kinds of issues. You know, Obama started to do that during his administration, but because President Trump issued an executive order, it got super scrutiny of the kind that the media and the protesters gave it. So he'd be smarter from a legal point of view to exercise his executive authority rather than his quasi-legislative authority. But look, this is going to survive. It will be challenged. I don't think there will be a stay granted, but you never know. All you need is one judge somewhere to issue a stay.
But 2 points to make on this, Maria. One, the countries that are included are not only included because ties of terrorism. It's because we don't have a functioning relationship, especially a counterterrorism relationship with those governments. People often name Saudi Arabia and say the 9/11 9/11 terrorists came from there. But we have worked over the past, decade, 15 years, incredibly closely with Saudi Arabia to improve those measures there. Also, it also goes underreported that the Obama administration didn't do anything in Syria, which is why we have the refugees in the first place. But they also didn't accept many Syrian refugees for most of his second term. It wasn't until the very end that he did this. So I think it's a little disingenuous that the Obama administration gets credit for something that he was doing in the last year of his presidency.
Well,
I think you make a good point when you say that it doesn't only deal with how many terrorists come, but what kind of relationship we have with the country. And that does explain why Iraq was taken off, because we are developing relationships with the, quote, elected government of Iraq. We certainly don't have it with Libya and Sudan and other countries.
I just want to push back, too, because the issue from day one that we raised on this very program is why the rush initially? Why to haphazardly throw out this order and basically catch everybody charged with enforcing it off guard? And there was the suggestion, at least, that there was a threat, an imminent threat. Well, this one's even, they've delayed this one. This one doesn't even, the second order doesn't even go into effect till March 16th. So it goes back to, why did you rush it? And they still have yet to answer that.
correct.
The president did himself say that he asked whether or not it could be delayed 10 days, and he was told no. People will die. People will die if it's delayed even one day, and now he's delaying it to 10 days after a stay. So I think it's right not to rush this. Let this be done in a systematic way. Let the courts look at it. Let the agencies look at it. We'll see whether it does any good or doesn't do any good.
We did not get your opinion yesterday when the story of the day, Alan, was the wiretapping. I want to get your take on that, because people are saying that the Obama administration denied it, but they actually didn't deny it. They just said that Obama did not order it.
Well, the president doesn't get to order wiretaps in the United States of America. That's not the job of the president. It has to come through the Justice Department, the FBI. From what we know, there were wiretaps that did capture conversations between officials and Russians. Probably it was wiretaps on the Russians. We do that routinely. We wiretap everybody, every other country. But we're not allowed to wiretap the Trump Tower. We're not allowed to wiretap Mr. Trump, who was then a candidate's wires. And that's what he said. And so I think what we'll find is a mixed picture in the end. And maybe we'll hear from it today when the new Deputy Attorney General nominee is questioned. He may have some answers. Certainly it would be appropriate to ask him these questions.
In terms of how he knows that he was wiretapped, where he got that information.
If he knows he was wiretapped. And whether he's generalizing and saying, look, there were wiretaps, so I'm just assuming I was wiretapped. I think one thing we all agree is there has to be an investigation. One hopes it will be an independent investigation. One of the issues that will come up this morning is whether this new Deputy Attorney General, who has a terrific reputation for being bipartisan, could conduct an independent investigation, or whether he should instead appoint an independent investigator or a special prosecutor. That will be the focus of this morning's confirmation hearing.
All right, we will see about that. Alan, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Likewise. Thank you.
Alan Dershowitz joining us there.